This one's pretty crazy, so you're going to want to stay with me till the end. What you have here is a space shuttle. And off that space shuttle, you see two giant rocket boosters falling off the side as it gets high into the upper atmosphere. Well, why are the boosters the size that they are? It's probably not what you'd guess, and it has a surprising amount to do with this, a horse's. Let me explain. Well, the engineers who designed the rocket boosters knew they were going to be assembled in a factory in Utah. Meanwhile, the thing was going to be launched from Houston or from Florida. That means they had to design the rocket boosters so they could be put on the back of a truck. And they could only be so big as to fit on that truck. Now, that truck was going to schlep them over to a rail cart, so they could only be so big as to fit on the rail cart. Well, that rail cart was going to travel across bridges and through tunnels. It could only be so big as to fit through the tunnels and through the width of the narrow bridges. Well, how big was that? In the United States, standard rail gauge is 4.85 feet wide. Why is that? Well, in the early days of rail travel, the people who built rail cars were also generally the same people who were building horse carriages. It is the same kind of equipment, same kind of technology. And over the years, horse carriages had actually become a fairly standard size. Why is that? Think of a horse carriage traveling on some country dirt road. The cart itself would carve two grooves into the road where the wheels sat. And so on heavily traveled roads, those grooves would get really deep because they were frequently traveled by lots of carts. Because of that, the carts had to all sort of be the same size, otherwise the wheels wouldn't fit into those grooves very well. So horse carts, in a weird way, became kind of standardized, even though there was no actual rule for this. Well, how wide were those grooves? Those grooves were based on the width of a standard cart. A standard cart was designed to be pulled by two horses. That means two horses side by side determined the width of the cart, and that cart determined the width of the early rail cars. The early rail cars determined the width of what became a standard rail gauge in the United States. That standard rail gauge in the United States determined the width of all train cars and all tunnels and all bridges built off of it. And the width of those tunnels and those bridges and all that infrastructure determined how big things could be if they were going to fit on the back of a train. And so something that went on the back of a train as complicated as the Space Shuttle rocket boosters was determined ultimately by the width of a horse. So yeah, that means one of the most sophisticated pieces of technology we have ever made was determined by the width of a horse's. That's this week's Fun Fact Friday. If you like learning things like this, make sure you like or subscribe so that you can be notified when we post more new content. That's Fun Fact Friday. We'll see you next week.